Welcome back, scholars, to our Digital Academy. I am Professor Spark. Whether we are turning the pages of a timeless novel, our mission remains the same. Will today's sweep us into the concert hall? Let's find out together.
Okay, let's dive into this explainer on a piece of music that is going to completely shatter everything you might think you know about its composer. When we hear the name Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, it's incredibly easy to picture this polite, powdered wig prodigy churning out perfectly elegant, balanced background noise for aristocratic dinner parties. People delicately sipping tea, right? But today, we're targeting a very different narrative. We're looking at the battle of order versus chaos. Specifically, Symphony No. 40 in G minor K550, which was composed in the incredibly fertile yet deeply troubled summer of 1788. Our goal today is to strip away centuries of that polite veneer and expose the raw, beating heart of this absolute masterpiece.
To really wrap our heads around just how radical this piece is, consider this number: 2. Out of the dozens upon dozens of symphonies Mozart composed throughout his entire lifetime, he wrote exactly 2 in a minor key. 2. One was a very early work, number 25, and the other is this one right here, which is often called the Great G Minor Symphony. You see, in the classical era, minor keys were generally reserved for very specific moments of theatrical tension or sacred mourning. So for Mozart to base an entire, massive symphony in G minor, that sets an immediate tone of rarity, impenetrable darkness, and impending drama. He's literally signaling to us, right from the very first page of the score, that we are leaving the polite ballroom far, far behind.
And hey, if the minor key wasn't enough of a warning for you, listen to how the eminent musicologist Charles Rosen describes Symphony No. 40. He called it a work of passion, violence, and grief. Let that sink in. Passion, violence, grief. These are absolutely not the words we typically associate with classical restraint. Rosen even noted that there's something shockingly seductive in how Mozart expresses suffering in this piece. We aren't dealing with some mathematical exercise in musical form here, we are dealing with a psychological thriller. But to understand where this violence and grief actually came from, we have to look at what was happening to the man behind the quill.
Part 1. The Dark Summer of 1788. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the brutal historical context surrounding the creation of this masterpiece.
In the summer of 1788, Mozart was going through this period of just frantic creative output. He wrote Symphonies 39, 40, and 41, the famous Jupiter Symphony, all in one incredibly rapid burst. But this creative explosion was happening against a backdrop of severe, almost unbelievable personal devastation. 1788 was just a year of compounding tragedies for him. He was facing crippling financial ruin and distress. His opera Don Giovanni, which we now universally recognize as one of the greatest ever written, well, it received a surprisingly lukewarm reception from the changing tastes of the Vienna public. The crushing blow, though, was the tragic death of his infant daughter. And bubbling under all this personal sorrow were the broader societal pressures and economic strains of an impending war in Europe. Now, while this symphony isn't a literal, direct programmatic diary of these specific events, he's not musically illustrating a battle or a funeral, the incredibly high emotional stakes and the turbulent atmosphere of late 18th century Europe absolutely bleed directly into the urgency of the music.
Part 2. Bridging two musical eras.
You see, Symphony No. 40 is far more than just a personal diary of grief. It actually serves as a massive philosophical battleground and really a vital, load-bearing bridge in the history of music. Mozart is taking the strict rules of the world he was born into and stretching them to their absolute breaking point just to accommodate the immense weight of his own humanity. Philosophically, the piece perfectly embodies the ultimate tension of the Enlightenment period. On one side, we have reason, order, classical form, and balance. This was the musical language Mozart inherited. But encroaching on the other side are the forces of romanticism, emotion, subjectivity, inner struggle, and the irrational depths of the human experience. Throughout its 25 to 30-minute runtime, the music constantly wrestles between these two poles. It explores the duality of light and dark, stability and chaos. Mozart is using the perfectly balanced architecture of classical form to house chaotic, unbridled human emotion. It's brilliant.
And this brings us to a crucial aesthetic concept of the time, Sturm und Drang, which translates to storm and stress. This was an edgy movement in German literature and music that emphasized extreme, dramatic, and turbulent emotions. It was actively rebelling against pure, polite elegance. This dark, intense urgency was essentially Mozart's artistic response to his hardships. It heavily influenced his earlier G minor works, and it finds its ultimate, most refined expression right here in Symphony No. 40.
Part 3. A Journey Through Turmoil.
Okay, to really understand this turmoil, we have to look at the symphony movement by movement. It's written for a relatively modest orchestra: flutes, oboes, bassoons, horns, and strings, with Mozart later revising the score to famously include 2 clarinets. But while the piece strictly follows a standard 4-movement classical structure, the emotional progression inside those boundaries is completely radical. Movement 1, the Molto Allegro. It opens in sonata form, but there is no grand introduction. It plunges us immediately, and I mean immediately, into a restless, breathless, sighing motif in the violins, hovering right over a nervously pulsating accompaniment in the violas. It establishes instant anxiety and melancholy. Mozart takes this obsessively fractured sighing motif and drives it through extreme chromatic slides and violent erupting counterpoint. It feels like a literal emotional breakdown conveyed through music. Even when a brief, lyrical second theme appears, the music rapidly darkens, violently pulling us back into a storm of pure, inescapable anxiety. Then, the pacing shifts. Movement 2, the Andante, moves us into E-flat major, offering a sense of relative calm. Here, the tone becomes highly lyrical and deeply reflective. We have a delicate, pulsating string background with floating wind figures. But listen closely, because this isn't a simple, happy escape. Mozart injects these chromatic, searching tones that give the movement a mysterious, almost supernatural quality. It's been beautifully described by critics as a dream escaping through the ivory gate of Elysium. It conveys this bittersweet elegance, a philosophical reflection on the fleeting nature of beauty, or maybe a retreat into an idealized, untouchable inner world.
But the piece definitely doesn't last. Movement 3, the Minuetto, snaps us violently back to reality. Traditionally, the minuet is this elegant, courtly dance. But here, Mozart completely shatters that form. He introduces an angry hemiola rhythm, which is a technique that intentionally creates jarring metric tension, making you feel completely off balance. Driven by complex G minor counterpoint, it evokes an almost imperial struggle, a profound suppressed rage. And the emotional whiplash is startling when he shifts to the trio section in G major, bringing a sudden wind-led sweetness and simplicity. It's an incredible duality, severe suppressed anger momentarily surrendering to a fleeting moment of grace before that dark, angry minuet stomps right back in.
Which propels us headlong into the finale, the Allegro Assai. This is a relentless, pushing, driving sonata that opens with what's called a Mannheim rocket, basically an aggressively ascending musical figure. The energy here is unceasing. As Mozart develops this movement, he uses extreme chromaticism. At one point, he runs through almost the entire chromatic scale, deliberately avoiding the home key of G, causing a feeling of total, terrifying disorientation for the listener. The second theme, much like in the first movement, tries to offer a glimmer of hope but is dramatically dragged straight back into the darkness.
And then we arrive at a crucial point, an ending without resolution. In the classical tradition, even pieces that explore minor key darkness almost always resolve neatly into a major key by the end, offering the audience a sense of comfort and triumph. Not Mozart. Not here. Symphony No. 40 ends firmly and aggressively in the dark minor key. There's no neat bow tying up the package. It expresses a defiant, unyielding intensity and an existential urgency right up to the final chord. It offers truth instead of comfort.
Part 4, the enduring legacy of K550. So, the crucial point is, what did this radical departure actually mean for the future of music?
Well, the enduring legacy of K550 cannot be overstated. It wasn't just a masterpiece of its own time, it was a literal blueprint for the future. This symphony was highly praised by later musical titans like Richard Wagner. By masterfully utilizing obsessive motif development, jarring dynamic contrasts, and extreme chromatic harmony within a strict classical architecture, Mozart essentially acted as a bridge to Romanticism. He proved that classical restraint could hide and, in fact, amplify the deepest, most turbulent human emotions. He paved the way for the deeply personal, confessional music of the 19th century, valuing emotional expression over strict formalism. It's exactly why, whether you're listening to a historically informed performance by Nicholas Harnoncourt or a modern interpretation by Simon Rattle with the Berlin Philharmonic, this remains one of Mozart's most frequently performed, profoundly moving, and intensely human works.
Which leaves us with this final question to consider today. Does Symphony No. 40 merely capture Mozart's specific personal tragedies of 1788, his grief, his poverty, his societal pressures, or did he manage, through his sheer genius, to bottle the universal struggle of the human condition? That tension between order and chaos, light and dark, reason and emotion, it's something literally every generation grapples with. Mozart just happened to give that struggle its perfect, timeless soundtrack. Think about that the next time you hear those restless violins begin to sigh.